My son and his wife decided my traditional religious views were too problematic for their daughter's christening and explicitly uninvited me just 2 weeks before the ceremony. But when they called asking if I could still host the reception at my home, since the venue fell through, their rehearsed request crumbled into silence. They had no idea that while quietly accepting their hurtful decision, I had been working with the church's education director to establish a special endowment for children's spiritual formation, and that I had already been appointed as the official spiritual mentor to all baptized children in the parish, including my granddaughter, through a centuries-old tradition that held more significance than a ceremonial role at a single event. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I'm sharing my guide to maintaining graceful relationships with adult children even through painful disagreements. At 73, I had envisioned my retirement years as a time of peaceful family connections and the special joy of being a grandmother. After dedicating 4 decades of my life to nurturing other people's children, I looked forward to the unique relationship I could build with my own grandchild. Instead, I found myself navigating a painful family conflict that tested not only my relationship with my son, but my understanding of what it truly means to guide a child's spiritual journey, with or without an official title. My name is Virginia Caldwell. After teaching 3rd grade for 42 years at St. Mary's Elementary in the small town of Lakeside, I had become something of a local institution. 3 generations of families had passed through my classroom, and I couldn't shop at the local grocery store without former students, now adults with children of their own, stopping to share memories or introduce their children. My approach to education had always balanced academic foundations with character development, something parents had appreciated even as educational trends shifted over the decades. I still remember my first day at St. Mary's in 1977, nervous but determined, standing before 28 3rd graders with their curious eyes and restless energy. The classroom had high ceilings with tall windows that let in streams of natural light, illuminating the worn wooden floors and simple crucifixes on the walls. The building itself dated back to 1923, and I could almost feel the presence of the countless teachers who had stood where I stood, guiding young minds in this same space. "Good morning, class," I had said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My name is Miss Caldwell, and we're going to learn wonderful things together this year." By the time I retired in 2019, I had taught over 1,000 children in that same classroom. The building had been renovated twice, the curriculum had evolved dramatically, and technology had transformed how we taught. But the essence of what children needed remained remarkably consistent: structure and nurturing, challenge and support, boundaries and freedom to explore. St. Mary's was connected to St. Catherine's Church, where my late husband Thomas and I had been active members since we married in 1970. Thomas was a civil engineer who designed bridges, practical, solid structures that brought people together, which always seemed a fitting metaphor for our marriage as well. He had a quieter faith than mine, less involved in the formal activities of the church, but deeply committed to its core values of integrity and service. When we met at a community fundraiser in 1968, he told me later that what first attracted him was watching how I interacted with the children's activities, showing patience and genuine interest in their excited explanations of their artwork. Though the school welcomed children of all faiths, its Catholic identity shaped its educational philosophy in ways I had always valued. The emphasis on serving others, the integration of spiritual development with academic learning, the celebration of saints and seasons that connected children to something larger than themselves. When Thomas passed away 8 years ago after 45 years of marriage, the church community became an even more central part of my life, providing both solace and purpose as I adjusted to widowhood. The ladies of the Altar Society brought casseroles and kept me company in those early weeks when grief made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. Father David visited regularly, offering spiritual guidance that acknowledged the depth of my loss without reducing it to platitudes. The choir, where Thomas and I had sung together for decades, kept his place open beside me for months, a gesture of respect that meant more than any formal condolence. When I finally retired from teaching 2 years ago, these church connections became even more important. I increased my volunteer hours, joined the parish council, and took on the coordination of the children's liturgy program. The structure of service and community helped fill the void left by the classroom, giving me purpose during a transition that many of my colleagues had found disorienting. Our son Michael had been raised in this faith tradition, serving as an altar boy through middle school and attending St. Mary's before moving on to the public high school where more advanced science courses were available. Thomas had been particularly proud of Michael's scientific mind, spending hours with him building model bridges and explaining structural principles in ways his young son could understand. That shared interest had led Michael to follow his father into engineering, though he chose environmental engineering with a focus on water quality rather than structural design. Though Michael had drifted away from regular church attendance during college and his early professional years, I had never sensed any significant rejection of his upbringing, just the common pattern of a young adult finding his own way. He would still attend Christmas Mass with me and participate respectfully in prayers at family gatherings. Occasionally, he would even reference lessons from his Catholic school days when discussing ethical questions or social issues. When he married Elise 5 years ago in a secular ceremony at the Lakeside Hotel and Conference Center, I had been disappointed but understanding. They were both successful professionals with advanced degrees, Michael an environmental engineer with the state's Department of Natural Resources, and Elise a corporate attorney specializing in environmental compliance. Like many in their generation, they approached tradition selectively, embracing some elements while questioning others. Their wedding reflected this hybrid approach to tradition. Though they chose a secular venue and officiant, they incorporated readings on love and commitment from diverse spiritual traditions, including a passage from St. Paul that had been read at my wedding to Thomas. They asked me to do one of the readings, and they used Thomas's favorite blessing before the meal at their reception. These thoughtful inclusions helped bridge our different approaches to faith and tradition. I remember watching them exchange vows. Michael tall and serious like his father, Elise radiant in a simple modern gown, and feeling a complex mixture of joy for their happiness and wistfulness about the Catholic ceremony Thomas and I had envisioned for our son since his baptism. But as Father David had reminded me during a moment of pre-wedding melancholy, the sacrament is about their commitment to each other before God, not about satisfying parental expectations. Your job now is to support the marriage they have chosen, not mourn the ceremony they didn't choose. I took that wisdom to heart, focusing on building a warm relationship with my new daughter-in-law. Elise was brilliant, principled, and genuinely kind, though her approach to life was more analytical than intuitive. Raised by secular academic parents, her father a physics professor and her mother a research librarian, she approached religion as an interesting sociological phenomenon. Rather than a living tradition, she asked thoughtful questions about my faith and never dismissed its importance to me, even when it was clear she viewed some Catholic teachings as problematic from her progressive perspective. "I admire how your faith motivates your service to others," she told me once, after helping me deliver Thanksgiving baskets to homebound parishioners. "I may not share all your beliefs, but I respect how you live them." I still remember my profound joy when they announced they were expecting their first child. Michael called on a Sunday evening, his voice brimming with the nervous excitement of impending fatherhood. I had just returned from evening mass and was settling in with a cup of tea and the crossword puzzle, a Sunday routine since Thomas passed. "Mom, how do you feel about being called Grandma?" he asked, barely containing his news. "I've been ready for that title for years," I laughed, my heart swelling with happiness. "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "Elise is pregnant," he confirmed. "Due in September. We wanted you to be the first to know." In that moment, all the small tensions and differences in our approaches to life seemed insignificant compared to the miracle of new life that would connect us forever. I found myself offering silent thanks that I had followed Father David's counsel to focus on the relationship rather than ritual differences. That foundation of mutual respect would now serve this expanding family. The months that followed were filled with tentative reconnections to family traditions. During a visit to help assemble nursery furniture, Michael asked about the christening gown that had been used for generations in our family, wondering if it had been preserved. I showed him the delicate cotton and lace garment, carefully stored in archival tissue in my cedar chest, along with a small album documenting its history. Photographs of Michael himself wearing it at his baptism, alongside similar images of his father and grandfather. I had no idea it went back that far, he said, touching the fragile fabric with surprising reverence. There's something powerful about this kind of continuity. Elise, too, began showing interest in faith traditions during her pregnancy. During a Sunday dinner in her second trimester, she inquired about Catholic baptism traditions, noting that while she had been raised without formal religion, she appreciated the sense of community and moral framework that faith traditions could provide. "We're not decided yet," she explained carefully, "but we're considering a christening at St. Catherine's. It would mean a lot to Michael to connect our child to his heritage. And honestly, seeing the support you've received from your church, community has made me think about what that could mean for our daughter." "Daughter?" I asked, surprised by the revelation. They had previously said they wanted to be surprised by the baby's gender. Elise smiled, resting her hand on her growing belly. "We found out last week. We're having a little girl." The prospect of a granddaughter brought fresh joy, along with memories of the special bond I'd shared with my own grandmother, who had taught me to bake, to garden, and to pray with simple, direct faith. Their interest in possibly returning to the church for their daughter's christening filled me with quiet happiness. Not because I needed them to mirror my exact beliefs, but because it suggested a desire to connect their child to something larger than themselves, to a tradition and community that had sustained our family through celebrations and sorrows alike. As Elise's due date approached, I was careful to respect their space while remaining available to help. I attended a modern childbirth class with Elise when Michael was away at a conference, learning techniques that hadn't existed when I had my son. I helped prepare freezer meals for the early postpartum days and assembled a basket of essentials they might not think to have on hand. When they asked me to be present at the hospital during labor, not in the delivery room but nearby for support, I was deeply touched by their inclusion. When little Sophia Catherine Caldwell was born that September, a perfect, dark-haired baby, with her father's thoughtful eyes and her mother's determined chin, I felt the special joy that only grandparenthood brings. They had surprised me with her middle name, explaining that they had chosen it to honor both the church that had been so important to our family and me, since I had done much of my life's work in its school. During those early weeks, I tried to be helpful without overstepping, bringing over homemade meals, offering to babysit for brief periods so the new parents could rest, and generally making myself available without imposing. The delicate balance worked well, and I treasured the moments of holding my granddaughter, singing the same lullabies I had once sung to Michael, watching her tiny features shift between expressions of contentment and puzzlement as she began to engage with the world around her. The christening discussions continued intermittently, with Michael mentioning in November that they were still planning on it, probably after the holidays. By January, they had even spoken with Father David at St. Catherine's about requirements and scheduling. I carefully avoided applying any pressure, simply expressing support for whatever they decided. "If you do choose St. Catherine's," I mentioned. Once, when Elise asked about the process, "I'm happy to help with arrangements or traditions, but only if you want. This is your decision entirely." "We appreciate that, Virginia," Elise replied, using my first name as she had since we first met. "We're trying to balance honoring Michael's heritage with creating our own approach to Sophia's spiritual education. It's more complex than I expected. I understood that complexity. As a teacher and parent, I had witnessed how each generation must integrate the wisdom of the past with the insights of the present, making faith a living tradition rather than a museum piece. Though I held to certain traditional understandings of Catholic teaching, I had never believed that rigidity served the spiritual development of children well. My classroom approach had always emphasized core values of compassion, justice, and reverence while allowing room for questions and personal connection. In early March, when Sophia was nearly 6 months old, Michael called with news that should have been purely joyful. "Mom, we've set a date for Sophia's christening," he said. "April 24th at St. Catherine's. Father David had an opening, and spring seemed like a nice time for it." "That's wonderful," I replied sincerely. "I'm so happy for you all." The family christening gown is preserved in archival tissue in my cedar chest, whenever you're ready to see if it might work for Sophia. There was a brief pause before Michael continued. "About the christening. Elise and I have been giving a lot of thought to who we want as godparents." "Of course," I said, expecting him to share their choices. In our family, godparents had traditionally been siblings or close friends, and I had no expectation of being asked, particularly given the Catholic tradition that parents typically don't serve as godparents to their own grandchildren. "We've asked Elise's brother Connor and his wife Jade," Michael continued. Connor was a software engineer who lived in Seattle with his wife, a pediatrician. Though I had only met them a few times, they seemed like thoughtful people who would take such a responsibility seriously. "They sound like wonderful choices," I affirmed. "Connor and Jade will be loving guides for Sophia. But there's something else we need to discuss about the ceremony itself," Michael added, his tone shifting slightly. Something in his voice signaled this wasn't a simple informational conversation. "What is it?" I asked. "Mom, you know we respect you and your dedication to your beliefs," he began, using the careful phrasing that often precedes difficult messages. "But Elise and I have been talking, and we feel that some of your views might be at odds with how we want to raise Sophia." Confused, I asked him to explain what he meant. "Your position on certain social issues," he elaborated, still speaking in careful generalities. "The Church has evolved on many topics, but we know you hold to more traditional interpretations. We're approaching this christening as a celebration of community and values like compassion and justice, not necessarily all the doctrinal positions." I had always considered my faith to be centered precisely on compassion and justice, though I respected that younger generations might interpret these differently on certain issues. Still uncertain about the actual concern, I assured him that I would never impose my views on their parenting decisions. "I understand that, Mom," he said, his voice tightening slightly. "But after talking it through, we think it would be better if you weren't actually present at the christening ceremony itself." His words hit me with physical force. "You don't want me at Sophia's christening?" I repeated, certain I had misunderstood. "It's not that we don't want you involved in Sophia's life," he hurried to clarify. "But the ceremony is about setting a foundation for her spiritual upbringing, and we want to make a clear statement about the inclusive, progressive values we intend to raise her with. Having you there might send mixed signals to our friends who know your positions." "What positions exactly are causing this concern?" I asked, my voice steady despite my churning emotions. There was another pause. "Mom, we know your views on same-sex marriage, on women's reproductive choices, on certain political issues. Connor and Jade are part of a diverse friend group, including several same-sex couples who will be attending. One of them recently asked if you would be uncomfortable with their presence, given things you've said at family gatherings in the past." I searched my memory for any comments that might have caused offense. Yes, I held to traditional Catholic teaching on marriage, but I had always tried to express my views with respect for those who disagreed. Had something I'd said been misinterpreted as personal judgment rather than adherence to my faith tradition? Michael, I may hold traditional views on certain matters of faith, but I have never believed in excluding or judging others, I said carefully. In 42 years of teaching, I welcomed every child and family with respect, regardless of their circumstances or beliefs. I know that, Mom, he said, sounding genuinely conflicted. But this ceremony is about looking forward, not back. Connor and Jade represent the values we want for Sophia. We're not judging your beliefs, but we need to establish our own approach to faith for our daughter. The conversation continued with assurances that they wanted me involved in Sophia's life, that this wasn't a rejection of me as a grandmother, that they hoped I would understand their position. They even suggested I could host a reception afterward at my home, just not attend the sacred ceremony itself. We were hoping to have a small gathering after the church service, Michael explained. The church hall was already booked for another event, and our house is too small for the number of people we're inviting. Would you be willing to host at your place? It would mean a lot to us, and you could be fully involved in that celebration. The request added a layer of painful irony to the situation. I was unsuitable to witness the spiritual ceremony, but acceptable as a hostess for the social gathering that followed. Still reeling from the exclusion, I told Michael I needed time to think about everything and would call him back in a few days. After we hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by photographs of our family through the years, Michael's baptism with Thomas and me beaming in our 1970s finery. Michael's graduation from college, his wedding to Elise, where I had welcomed her with genuine affection. Recent photos of baby Sophia sleeping peacefully in my arms. The pain of exclusion from this significant moment in my granddaughter's life was acute, but beneath it lay a deeper hurt. The realization that my son saw my faith, the same faith that had guided my 42 years of nurturing children, including him, as something problematic, something that might contaminate his daughter's spiritual formation. That evening, I called my dear friend Eleanor, who had taught 5th grade at St. Mary's for decades before her own retirement. We had started at the school the same year and had supported each other through career milestones, family challenges, and personal transitions. She had been widowed just a year before Thomas passed, and our shared experience of grief had deepened our friendship further. They've banned me from my own granddaughter's christening, I explained, still struggling to process the reality of it. Apparently, my traditional Catholic views make me unsuitable to witness her welcome into the very church where I've worshipped for 50 years. Oh, Virginia, Eleanor sighed. I'm so sorry. That must be heartbreaking. It is, I admitted, tears finally coming now that I was speaking with someone who would understand the full significance of this exclusion. It's not just about missing the ceremony, it's what it represents. They're rejecting not just my presence, but what I stand for, the faith that has shaped my entire life's work. Eleanor's outrage on my behalf was comforting, but her practical advice even more so. Virginia, this isn't really about your views, she said after listening to the details. It's about Michael and Elise asserting their authority as parents, and perhaps managing perceptions among their social circle. They're using the ceremony as a statement about their values, which is their right, but excluding you is both unnecessary and unkind. What should I do? I asked. Argue with them? Refuse to host the reception? Neither seems likely to improve the situation. There might be another approach entirely, Eleanor suggested thoughtfully. One that honors both your relationship with Sophia and the spiritual significance you place on this milestone without directly challenging Michael and Elise's decision. What do you mean? I asked. Well, what is the true purpose of having godparents or being present at a baptism? Isn't it about committing to support the child's spiritual formation? Maybe there's another way you can fulfill that role that doesn't depend on standing by the font during the ceremony. As we talked through possibilities, the seeds of an alternative path began to take shape. one that would require grace, strategic thinking, and a deepened understanding of baptismal traditions. Beyond the ceremonial event itself, I began to see that perhaps this painful exclusion might actually open a door to something more meaningful than a single day's ceremony. "You've always told your students that challenges are opportunities in disguise," Eleanor reminded me. "Perhaps this is one of those moments, a chance to demonstrate the very faith they think is problematic by responding with grace rather than grievance." The next morning, after a night of prayer and reflection, I called Father David, who had known our family for decades and had been my spiritual director since Thomas's passing. After explaining the situation, I asked for his perspective on the true meaning of godparenthood beyond the ceremonial role. "I'm so sorry you're experiencing this, Virginia," he said with genuine compassion. "Family conflicts around sacraments have become increasingly common as our society grows more divided on social issues. It's particularly painful when it separates generations that should be supporting each other. I don't want to fight with them about it," I explained. "That would only create more distance between us at a time when Sophia needs family harmony. But I also don't want to simply accept being excluded from her spiritual formation." "The ceremony is important symbolically," he acknowledged, "but in the Church's understanding, a godparent's true role is ongoing spiritual mentorship, being a consistent, supportive presence in a child's faith journey. That doesn't begin and end with standing at the baptismal font." His words sparked a memory of conversations we'd had months earlier about the parish's need for expanded children's programming. St. Catherine's had been discussing a more structured approach to faith formation, but lacked both funding and qualified leadership to develop it. "Tell me more about the spiritual mentor program you mentioned during our planning meetings," I asked. "The one based on older practices in the Church." Father David explained that historically, parishes had appointed respected elders as spiritual companions to support families in raising children in the faith, not replacing godparents, but complementing them with wisdom and consistent presence in the parish community. This tradition had faded in modern practice, but aligned perfectly with the Church's current needs for intergenerational connections. "We've actually been hoping to revive something similar," he said, warming to the topic. "Children need multiple adult relationships to nurture their spiritual development. Parents and godparents are primary, of course, but the broader community plays a vital role too." I found myself thinking about the endowment funds Thomas and I had set aside years ago for charitable purposes. We had always intended to support Catholic education, but had never formalized specific plans. As Father David described the parish's vision for expanded children's programming, I began to see how these resources might serve a greater purpose than I had imagined, and how they might create a pathway to meaningful involvement in Sophia's spiritual journey despite my exclusion from the christening ceremony. By the end of our conversation, a path forward had emerged, one that would honor my relationship with Sophia while respecting her parents' wishes for the christening ceremony itself. It would require humility, strategic planning, and a focus on long-term relationship rather than the momentary hurt of exclusion. "This approach honors what baptism truly represents," Father David affirmed as we outlined the initial steps. "Not just a one-time ceremony, but the beginning of a lifelong journey within a community of faith." In the days that followed, I began researching both historical and contemporary approaches to spiritual mentorship within the Catholic tradition, finding rich resources that expanded my understanding beyond the familiar godparent model. I also reflected deeply on my true priorities. Was my desire to attend the ceremony about public recognition, or about supporting Sophia's spiritual journey? Was there a way to honor the substance of that commitment, even without the formal title or ceremonial role? The answer came through prayer and honest self-examination. This wasn't about my pride or public acknowledgement. It was about creating pathways for grace to work in my granddaughter's life. If that meant stepping back from the ceremony while creating more significant long-term connections, then that sacrifice would be worth making. A week after Michael's difficult phone call, I called him back with my response. "I've given a lot of thought to our conversation," I told him. "While I'm deeply saddened not to witness Sophia's christening, I want you to know that I respect your decision as her parents. I would still be happy to host the reception afterward if that would be helpful to you." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Thank you for understanding, Mom. And yes, we would still very much appreciate having the reception at your home. The church hall was already booked, and we've been scrambling to find an alternative." What Michael didn't know, what would become clear only in the weeks and months that followed, was that my acceptance of their decision was not resignation, but redirection. With quiet determination, I had begun working with Father David and the parish council on an initiative that would transform both my relationship with Sophia and the broader community's approach to children's spiritual formation. Sometimes when one door closes, another opens that leads to places of unexpected beauty and meaning. The path I had begun to walk would ultimately create bonds far stronger than a ceremonial role at a single event, though the journey there would require patience, wisdom, and a willingness to redefine what it meant to be a spiritual guide in a child's life. 2 weeks between accepting my exclusion from Sophia's christening and the actual ceremony were filled with purposeful activity. Rather than dwelling on hurt feelings, I channeled my energy into 3 parallel paths: preparing my home for the reception, developing the spiritual mentorship program with Father David, and establishing the endowment that would support children's faith formation in the parish for generations to come. The reception preparations were straightforward, if emotionally complex. I wanted the gathering to be beautiful and welcoming, a celebration worthy of Sophia's milestone regardless of my personal feelings about being excluded from the ceremony itself. I ordered fresh flowers for every room, prepared homemade cookies and pastries that could be frozen until the event, and brought out the fine china that had been used for family celebrations since Thomas and I received it as wedding gifts. While polishing silver and pressing linens, I often found myself reflecting on the deeper meaning of hospitality as a spiritual practice. There was something profoundly Christian, I realized, about creating a beautiful welcome, even when feeling unwelcome yourself. Each task became a form of prayer, an offering of love that transcended the hurt that had initially clouded my reaction to Michael and Elise's decision. The spiritual mentorship program took shape more rapidly than I had anticipated, thanks to Father David's enthusiasm and the parish council's recognition of a long-standing need. St. Catherine's had been discussing enhanced children's ministry for years, but limited resources and competing priorities had prevented meaningful action. My proposal, to establish both a program and the endowment to sustain it, provided the catalyst needed to transform concept into reality. We've been talking about intergenerational faith formation since before the pandemic, Sister Margaret, the parish's director of religious education, told me during our planning meeting. The research is clear that children need multiple adult relationships to develop a living faith, especially in today's fragmented society. But until now, we haven't had the infrastructure to implement what we know works. Sister Margaret had come to St. Catherine's 5 years earlier after a career teaching theology at a Catholic university. In her 60s, with short silver hair and perpetually ink-stained fingers from her constant note-taking, she brought both academic rigor and practical wisdom to the parish's educational programs. She had been trying to modernize the religious education curriculum while honoring traditional elements, walking the same careful balance I had navigated during my teaching career. "What I appreciate about your proposal, Virginia," she said, studying the draft document we had developed, "is how it bridges traditional practice with contemporary needs. These intergenerational connections were once organic in parish communities, but nowadays they need intentional structure to flourish." Together with Father David, Sister Margaret, and 2 other retired educators from the parish, we developed a framework for what would officially be called the Spiritual Companions Ministry, i.e., Structured program pairing experienced members of the congregation with newly baptized children and their families. These relationships would continue throughout childhood, providing consistent spiritual support beyond what parents and godparents alone could offer. The program would include regular gatherings where children and their companions would participate in age-appropriate faith activities, one-on-one mentoring sessions as children grew older, and consistent presence at significant faith milestones such as First Communion and Confirmation. Companions would receive special training in child development, contemporary approaches to faith formation, and appropriate boundaries for these spiritual friendships. This isn't replacing godparents, Father David emphasized during the parish council presentation. It's recognizing that in earlier eras, children grew up surrounded by extended family and community members who shared consistent faith values. Today's families need intentional structures to recreate that supportive environment. Rita Garcia, a retired pediatrician and council member in her 70s, raised her hand. How will this work with families who don't attend regularly? Many children are baptized, but then we don't see them again until First Communion preparation. That's precisely one of the gaps this program is designed to address, I explained. The spiritual companion maintains connection even when family attendance is irregular, serving as a bridge back to the community during those transitional years. They might send birthday cards with religious themes, provide children's prayer, books or age-appropriate religious stories as gifts, or simply check in periodically to maintain the relationship. And what about families who might be uncomfortable with traditional language or concepts? Asked Martin Okafor, one of the younger council members whose own children were elementary-aged. Many young parents today are sensitive about certain doctrinal positions. The companions will receive training in meeting families where they are spiritually, Sister Margaret answered. The goal isn't to impose rigid interpretations, but to accompany people on their journey, focusing on core values of love, service, and community while being respectful of each family's approach. This program is about building relationships, not enforcing conformity. These were exactly the kinds of thoughtful questions I had anticipated. In developing the program, we had been careful to create guidelines that would allow for the diversity of modern Catholic families while maintaining connection to essential traditions, precisely the balance that Michael and Elise had struggled to find in their approach to Sophia's christening. The council unanimously approved the program, with several members noting that it addressed a critical gap in the parish's ministry to young families. What they didn't know was how personally meaningful this initiative was for me, that it had emerged from my own exclusion from my granddaughter's christening, but had evolved into something far more significant than my individual circumstances. The fee. Third element, establishing the endowment, required several meetings with the diocesan financial office and my own financial advisor. Thomas and I had been blessed with careful investments that had grown substantially over the decades, and we had always intended a significant portion to support Catholic education. Working with these advisors, I established the Thomas and Virginia Caldwell Faith Formation Endowment, structured to provide permanent funding for children's spiritual education at St. Catherine's, with particular support for the new Spiritual Companions program. The meetings with Kenneth Abernathy, the diocesan financial director, were particularly meaningful. A serious man in his 60s with reading glasses perpetually perched on the end of his nose, he had known Thomas professionally and shared his methodical approach to planning. Thomas would be very pleased with how you've structured this, he told me as we reviewed the final documents. It's sustainable, practical, and focused on real needs rather than abstract ideals. Exactly his approach to problem solving. That means a great deal coming from you, Kenneth, I replied, feeling Thomas's presence especially strongly in that moment. He always believed that faith should be expressed in tangible action, not just words. And this is certainly tangible, Kenneth said, gesturing to the endowment papers. The initial funding is substantial enough to support the program immediately, and the structure ensures it will continue to grow and adapt long after all of us are gone. We had designed the endowment with careful attention to both immediate needs and long-term sustainability. The principal would remain untouched, while the annual investment proceeds would fund program materials, training for volunteer companions, special events for participating families, and eventually a part-time coordinator position. Additional provisions in my will would significantly increase the principal amount after my passing, ensuring the program's permanence in parish life. The legal documents were finalized just days before Sophia's christening, a timing that felt providential rather than coincidental. As I signed the last page, I felt a profound sense of rightness about this path. What had begun as a response to personal hurt had evolved into something that would benefit countless children and families for generations to come. What gave me the greatest peace during this time of intense activity was how this approach honored Thomas's memory and values. He had always believed in practical solutions rather than emotional reactions, in building bridges rather than emphasizing divisions. The endowment and program we were establishing would create connections between generations that might otherwise remain separate, fostering understanding that transcended the current social divides that had led to my exclusion from the ceremony. Between planning meetings and paperwork, I found moments to reflect on my own motivations and feelings. Was I still hurt by Michael and Elise's decision? Yes, undeniably. But that pain had been transformed into creative energy rather than festering into bitterness. Was I trying to prove something or make them regret their choice? I examined my heart carefully on this question, knowing how easily righteous indignation can masquerade as constructive action. What I discovered through honest prayer and self-examination was that my primary motivation had shifted. While the initial impulse had come from painful exclusion, the project had taken on its own significance beyond my personal circumstances. I genuinely believed in the value of intentional intergenerational connections in faith communities, not just for Sophia, but for all the children in our parish. This wasn't about proving Michael and Elise wrong. It was about creating something right and good that would long outlast our current conflict. The day before the christening, Father David called with news that would transform my understanding of what was unfolding. The parish council has unanimously voted to appoint you as the inaugural elder companion for the Spiritual Companions Ministry, he told me. This is a formal pastoral role with responsibility for guiding all the baptized children in their faith journey, working alongside parents and godparents as an official representative of the parish community. That's a tremendous honor, I replied, genuinely moved by this recognition. There's more, he continued. This role has deep historical roots in church tradition. From the early centuries of Christianity through medieval times, parishes appointed respected elders as spiritual guardians to all baptized children. In many regions, this role was considered even more enduring than individual godparents, as the elder companion maintained connection with children throughout their formative years, even if families moved or circumstances changed. I had no idea. This tradition went so far back, I admitted, fascinated by this historical context. Most people don't, because the practice largely disappeared after the Reformation in many regions. But it's actually mentioned in several early church documents as an essential component of Christian formation. By reviving this tradition, we're not creating something new, but reclaiming an ancient understanding of communal responsibility for children's spiritual development. Father David explained that he had been researching historical baptismal practices for a doctoral project he'd never completed, and my situation had prompted him to revisit those materials. What he discovered was a rich tradition that had been largely forgotten in contemporary practice. The role of community elders who served as spiritual guides to all children baptized in the parish. In the early church, this role was considered essential, he explained with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a long-treasured discovery. Before Christianity became institutionalized, these elder guides ensured continuity of faith understanding, even when individual families faced persecution or displacement. The community held collective responsibility for each child's spiritual formation. What Father David was describing was essentially a form of communal godparenthood, a structured, recognized role that would allow me to have a legitimate spiritual connection to all baptized children in the parish, including Sophia, regardless of whether I attended their individual ceremonies. As elder companion, you'll be formally recognized during each baptism going forward, even when you're not physically present, he explained. The liturgy will include acknowledgement of your role in the child's ongoing formation. It's not the same as being there, I know, but it establishes your spiritual connection to each child in a way that's actually more enduring than simply witnessing the ceremony. The irony wasn't lost on me. In being excluded from one ceremonial role, I had been led to discover and revive a more profound tradition that would have greater long-term significance. What had begun as a painful rejection had opened the door to deeper understanding of baptismal traditions that even lifelong Catholics rarely encountered. We've prepared a special certificate formally appointing you to this role, Father David continued. I'd like to present it at Sophia's reception, tomorrow, if that's acceptable to you. While you couldn't be present at her christening, this would officially establish your spiritual connection to her and all children baptized in our parish. I hesitated briefly, wondering how Michael and Elise might react to such a public announcement at their celebration. I wouldn't want to create any awkwardness or seem to be undermining their wishes, I said carefully. I understand that concern, Father David assured me. I've actually already mentioned this to Michael when he came for the final christening preparation. I explained the historical tradition we're reviving and your role in developing the new ministry. He seemed genuinely interested in the historical aspects and said he had no objection to acknowledging your appointment during the reception. This unexpected openness from Michael gave me hope that perhaps the distance between us wasn't as vast as it had seemed during our painful phone conversation. Perhaps, like me, he was finding his way toward a perspective that could honor both his own parental authority and the value of continuing family and faith traditions. That evening, alone in my home prepared for the next day's reception, I spent time in prayer, not asking for anything but offering gratitude for the unexpected path that had emerged from what initially seemed only loss. Yes, I still felt the sting of exclusion from witnessing Sophia's baptism, but that pain had been transformed into something constructive rather than destructive. Looking around at the dining room table set with family china, the fresh flowers, arranged in crystal vases that had been wedding gifts, the handmade welcome banner for Sophia hanging above the fireplace, I felt Thomas's presence particularly strongly. He had always believed in responding to difficulties with practical creativity rather than recrimination. Anyone can complain about problems, he used to say. The real challenge is finding solutions that build rather than destroy. The spiritual mentorship program and endowment were exactly the kind of constructive response he would have advocated, honoring tradition while addressing contemporary needs, focusing on long-term relationships rather than momentary ceremonies, creating connections rather than emphasizing divisions. Whatever tomorrow brought, I knew that this path forward honored both my faith and his memory in ways that mere attendance at a ceremony could not have achieved. The morning of Sophia's christening dawned clear and bright with the fresh promise of spring. Though I wouldn't be at the church, I marked the time of the ceremony by lighting a special candle and saying prayers for my granddaughter, her parents, and her godparents. There was a bittersweet peace in this private observance, acknowledging the loss while embracing the new path forward. I imagined Sophia in the family christening gown that had clothed 4 generations of our family, picturing the ancient words of blessing being spoken over her, visualizing the water of baptism welcoming her into a faith tradition that stretched back 2,000 years. Though I wasn't physically present, my spirit was very much with them in that sacred moment. Afterward, I busied myself with final preparations for the reception, arranging the buffet, checking that everything was ready for the youngest and oldest guests, placing the final touches on the welcome table where photos of family baptisms through the generations were displayed alongside Sophia's baptismal candle, which Michael had promised to bring to the reception. Guests began arriving shortly. After noon, I welcomed each one warmly, including several same-sex couples who were friends of Connor and Jade. If they had been told about my problematic views, it wasn't evident in their friendly responses to my hospitality. The irony of this easy interaction only underscored how unnecessary my exclusion from the ceremony had been. One of these couples, Lisa and Meredith, engaged me in a particularly warm conversation about the historical photos on display. "These family connections are so special," Lisa commented, studying the image of Michael in the same christening gown Sophia had worn today. "Neither of us had these kinds of traditions growing up, but we hope to create them for our daughter." "You have a daughter?" I asked. "Yes, Zoe." "She's 3, Meredith replied, showing me a phone photo of a beaming little girl with curly hair and her mother's smile. "We're not religious in the traditional sense, but we're trying to give her a foundation of values and community. It's harder than we expected to create that without the structures our parents had." This honest admission led to a thoughtful conversation about the challenges of transmitting values across generations in a rapidly changing society. Precisely, the issues that the Spiritual Companions program hoped to address. Far from the awkward interaction that Michael and Elise might have feared, we found common ground in our shared concern for children's spiritual and moral development, despite our different starting points. When Michael, Elise, and Sophia arrived, with Connor, Jade, and their immediate family members, I greeted them all with genuine warmth. Sophia looked angelic in the family christening gown, which Elise had indeed decided to use, paired with a modern bonnet rather than the traditional one. "Everything looks beautiful, Mom," Michael said, visibly relieved by my composed demeanor. "Thank you for doing this for us." "Of course," I replied simply. "This is Sophia's day, and that's what matters most." I noticed Elise studying me with a slightly puzzled expression, perhaps surprised by my genuine serenity. The hurt hadn't disappeared, but it had been transformed into something else, a creative energy that allowed me to be fully present in celebrating this milestone without resentment clouding the joy. The reception unfolded smoothly, with delicious food, warm conversation, and the special joy that accompanies a significant milestone in a child's life. I moved through my role as hostess with genuine pleasure in celebrating Sophia's christening, focusing on the meaning of the day rather than my absence from part of it. Several times, I found myself in conversation with Connor and Jade, Sophia's official godparents. Rather than feeling competitive or resentful toward them, I was genuinely interested in knowing more about the people who would have a special role in my granddaughter's spiritual formation. "Michael has told us so much about your influence on his childhood," Jade said during one such conversation, "especially your Christmas traditions and the way you taught him about service to others. We hope to continue some of those with Sophia. I'd be happy to share any traditions or activities that might be helpful," I offered sincerely. Being a godparent is a meaningful commitment, and sometimes it helps to have practical ideas for nurturing that connection as the child grows. "We'd appreciate that," Connor replied with unexpected warmth. To be honest, neither of us grew up with very active godparents, so we're figuring this out as we go. Having your experience to draw on would be really valuable. This conversation planted the seed for what would eventually become a collaborative, rather than competitive relationship in Sophia's spiritual guidance. But that development was still in the future, waiting to unfold through the program that was just beginning. As the afternoon progressed, Father David arrived, having come directly from another parish obligation. His presence was expected. As the officiating priest, he had been invited to the reception, but I noticed he carried a small package that hadn't been mentioned before. After greeting various guests and spending time blessing and admiring Sophia, Father David asked for everyone's attention. The room quieted as he moved to stand beside me. Today, we celebrated Sophia's entrance into the Christian community through the sacrament of baptism. He began. It's a day of joy, not just for her, immediate family, but for our entire parish family, as we all share responsibility for supporting her growth in faith. He spoke briefly about the meaning of baptism and the community's role in nurturing each child's spiritual development. Then, to my surprise, he seamlessly transitioned to the announcement we had discussed. This seems a perfect occasion to share some exciting news about how St. Catherine's is enhancing our support for baptized children and their families, he continued. After extensive research into historical practices and contemporary needs, our parish is reviving the ancient tradition of elder companions, respected members of the faith community who serve as spiritual mentors to all our parish children, working alongside parents and godparents. A murmur of interest moved through the gathering as Father David explained the historical roots and modern application of this tradition. I noticed Michael listening with particular attention, and Elise's expression shifting from polite interest to genuine curiosity as Father David detailed the comprehensive approach to children's spiritual formation that the program would provide. It gives me great pleasure to announce that the Parish Council has unanimously approved the establishment of this ministry and appointed Virginia Caldwell as our inaugural elder companion, he said, turning toward me. Virginia's 4 decades of experience nurturing children's intellectual, emotional, and spiritual growth make her uniquely qualified for this role. As elder companion, she will have a special connection to all children baptized in our parish, including young Sophia. Here, Father David handed me the package he had brought, a beautifully framed certificate of appointment, featuring calligraphy and traditional religious symbols. The document formally established my role as elder companion, with specific reference to the historical traditions being revived and my responsibilities to all baptized children in the parish community. Additionally, Father David continued, we are deeply grateful to announce the establishment of the Thomas and Virginia Caldwell Faith Formation Endowment, which will provide permanent support for children's spiritual education in our parish, including this new ministry. This generous gift ensures that generations of children will benefit from intentional, supportive faith formation within our community. The announcement was met with spontaneous applause. I felt a complex mixture of emotions: humility at the formal recognition, satisfaction at seeing the program launched, and a quiet sense of vindication that wasn't about proving anyone wrong, but about affirming the value of what I could contribute to my granddaughter's life and the lives of other children. What happened next was unexpected. Elise, still holding Sophia, approached me with a thoughtful expression. I had no idea you were working on something like this, she said quietly. Father David mentioned a new program when we met for baptism preparation, but I didn't connect it to you. It sounds like exactly what modern families need: support that respects parents' authority while providing children with broader connections to faith traditions. That was precisely our intention, I replied, to create supports that complement rather than compete with parents' primary role. She studied me for a moment longer, then asked a question that suggested she was seeing our conflict from a new perspective. Was this already in development before our conversation about the ceremony? The idea existed, I answered honestly, but your decision accelerated its implementation. Sometimes closed doors lead to unexpected openings. Elise nodded, slowly. I think I understand. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to my eyes, she carefully transferred Sophia into my arms. Your granddaughter has had a long day of ceremony and celebration. Would you like to have some quiet time with her while Michael and I thank our guests? This simple act of trust, allowing me to care for Sophia in a quiet moment, apart from the social gathering, felt like the beginning of a bridge across the divide that had opened between us. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation or an admission of regret for excluding me from the ceremony, but it was an acknowledgement of my significant place in Sophia's life going forward. As I settled into the rocking chair in the small sitting room, Adjacent to the living room, holding my sleeping granddaughter against my shoulder, I felt a profound sense of peace. The certificate appointing me as elder companion lay on the side table beside me, but the true connection I felt to Sophia had nothing to do with formal titles or documents. It was an invisible but unbreakable bond of love, one that would find expression through the new ministry we had created but existed independently of any official recognition. In that quiet moment, I understood that becoming a different kind of godparent wasn't about finding an alternative title or role. It was about transcending the hurt of exclusion to create something more meaningful than ceremonial inclusion could have provided. It was about responding to rejection with creativity rather than recrimination, about choosing to build rather than to break. As Sophia stirred slightly in her sleep, her tiny hand reflexively grasping my finger, I whispered the baptismal blessing I hadn't been able to witness in the church. Sophia Catherine, child of God, you are sealed by the Holy Spirit, in baptism and marked as Christ's own forever. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that Thomas would have approved of the path I had chosen. Rather than fighting a battle over ceremonial inclusion, I had created a legacy that would benefit not just Sophia, but countless children in our parish for generations to come. What had begun as painful exclusion had been transformed into expansive inclusion, not just for me and my granddaughter, but for an entire community of faith. The months following Sophia's christening witnessed a gradual but meaningful evolution in my relationship with Michael and Elise. What began as cautious accommodation shifted toward genuine appreciation as the spiritual companions ministry took shape, and my role as elder companion unfolded in ways none of us had fully anticipated. True, reconciliation, I discovered, isn't a single dramatic moment, but a series of small bridges built across the divide of misunderstanding, each one making the next easier to construct. The first such bridge emerged just 2 weeks after the christening, when Elise unexpectedly called to ask if I would be willing to watch Sophia for a few hours while she attended an emergency meeting at her law firm. Previously, her mother had been their go-to childcare option, but she was unavailable that day. I know it's last minute, Elise apologized, and if you have other commitments, I completely understand. I'd be delighted, I assured her, careful to keep my tone casual despite my inner excitement. This would be my first time caring for Sophia alone since the christening conflict had surfaced. There's formula prepared in the refrigerator, Elise explained when she dropped Sophia off at my home that afternoon. And I've written down her current schedule, though she's been a bit unpredictable lately. She hesitated, then added, I know. You raised Michael, so you obviously know what you're doing. I just tend to over-prepare. All parents do. I smiled, remembering my own carefully detailed notes for babysitters when Michael was an infant. And every baby is different. I appreciate having her current patterns to follow. As she prepared to leave, Elise paused at the door. Virginia, I've been meaning to tell you, the Spiritual Companions program you've created sounds really remarkable. Father David shared some of the materials with us after the reception, and the historical research is fascinating. Thank you, I replied, touched by her acknowledgement. It's still developing, but the parish response has been enthusiastic. I can see why, she said thoughtfully. It addresses something many of our friends with children have mentioned, wanting their kids to have spiritual guidance without the rigid structures they found difficult in their own upbringing. She glanced at her watch. I should go, but maybe we could talk more about it another time? That afternoon with Sophia was precious beyond words, reading to her from a cloth book about animals, singing the lullabies I had once sung to Michael, watching her discover her own reflection in the mirror I held before her. When she grew fussy in the late afternoon, I walked her through my garden, pointing out the spring flowers and whispering their names, a tradition my own grandmother had started with me nearly 7 decades earlier. When Elise returned, she found us in the sunroom, Sophia sleeping peacefully against my shoulder, as I rocked gently in the chair that had been my own mother's. "She looks so content," Elise observed softly. "We had a wonderful time," I replied. "She's an absolute joy." Something in that simple exchange seemed to shift the atmosphere between us. A recognition that whatever our differences in viewpoint, we shared a profound love for this child that transcended other considerations. As Elise gathered Sophia's things, she noticed the children's Bible on the side table, bookmarked with a photo of Michael at about Sophia's age. "Was that Michael's?" she asked. "Yes, my mother gave it to him when he was baptized. I thought Sophia might enjoy the pictures, though she's a bit young for the stories yet." Elise picked up the book, examining the well-loved pages with their simple illustrations. "This is lovely. Much gentler than the children's Bible I remember from Sunday school. Those were all fire and brimstone. This one focuses on God's love and care," I explained. "I always believed children should encounter the nurturing aspects of faith before the challenging ones." "That makes sense," she nodded, still examining the book. After a moment's hesitation, she asked, "Would you mind if we borrowed this? I'd like to start reading to Sophia from it." This simple request represented a significant opening. "Of course," I replied, careful not to overemphasize its importance. "You're welcome to keep it as long as you like." These small connections multiplied in the weeks that followed. Michael began calling more regularly, often with questions about Sophia's development or behavior, parenting advice that naturally led to deeper conversations about family history and values. Elise occasionally joined these calls, particularly when the topic turned to the Spiritual Companions program, which increasingly interested her. The program itself was developing rapidly, with 12 parish volunteers undergoing the initial training to serve as companions to baptized children. As elder companion, I coordinated these preparations, drawing on both my educational background and the extensive research Father David and Sister Margaret had assembled on faith formation practices. "What makes this program unique," I explained during one planning session, "is how it combines traditional wisdom with contemporary understanding of child development. We're not just teaching religious concepts, we're building relationships that help children experience faith as a living reality." The first official pairings of children with their spiritual companions occurred at a special blessing ceremony during Sunday Mass in late June. 6 recently baptized infants, including Sophia, were matched with companions who would walk alongside them throughout childhood. I had carefully selected Grace Sullivan, a retired pediatric nurse with a gentle manner and progressive social views, as Sophia's companion, a choice that acknowledged the values Michael and Elise had emphasized while ensuring their daughter would receive knowledgeable spiritual guidance. To my surprise and delight, Michael, Elise, and Sophia attended this ceremony, sitting near the front of the church. Though they weren't regular Mass attendees, they participated respectfully in the service and seemed genuinely appreciative of the thoughtfulness evident in the companion pairings. "Grace seems wonderful," Elise commented at the reception afterward, watching as the older woman spoke warmly with other parents. "Her background in children's health care gives us something in common right away." "I thought you might connect well," I acknowledged. "She's been a mentor to many young parents over the years, both professionally and personally." "How will her role differ from Connor and Jade's as godparents?" Michael asked, genuinely curious rather than defensive. "Godparents have a sacramental role that's primarily spiritual," I explained. "Spiritual companions focus more on practical faith formation through regular contact and shared activities. Grace will be available to both you and Sophia as questions about faith arise, offering resources and gentle guidance without imposing specific interpretations." "So she's not replacing us or the godparents," Elise clarified, "but supplementing with additional support." "Exactly," I nodded. The program recognizes that children benefit from multiple trusted adults who can offer different perspectives on faith questions as they grow. As the conversation continued, I realized that Michael and Elise were engaging with these concepts much more openly than they had during our painful pre-christening discussion. Something had shifted in their perspective, or perhaps in how they perceived my intentions. The program's structured, thoughtful approach to faith formation seemed to address concerns they had struggled to articulate earlier. This growing understanding was tested in late July, when the parish bulletin announced plans for a special blessing of grandparents and grandchildren on the feast of Saints Joachim and Anne, the traditional names of Mary's parents and Jesus' grandparents. The announcement specifically mentioned my role as elder companion and invited all parish grandparents to participate with their grandchildren. The evening after this announcement appeared, Michael called. "Mom, we noticed the grandparents' blessing. Coming up," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "We wanted to talk about whether you were expecting us to attend." I appreciated his directness. "I wasn't assuming anything," I assured him. "It's completely your decision whether to participate. The thing is," he continued, "we're still finding our comfort level with church participation. We want Sophia to have spiritual guidance, which is why we value the Companions program. But we're cautious about too many specifically religious ceremonies." Rather than feeling disappointed, I recognized this conversation as a healthy step. Michael directly expressing his concerns rather than making assumptions about my expectations. "I understand completely," I told him. "The blessing is available for those who wish to participate, but it's entirely optional. Grace will be there as Sophia's companion, so your daughter will be included in the broader community blessing even if you choose not to attend personally." There was a pause. Then Elise's voice joined the conversation on speakerphone. "We appreciate your understanding, Virginia. We're trying to be thoughtful about Sophia's spiritual formation without committing to practices we're not entirely comfortable with ourselves. That's exactly what good parents should do," I affirmed. "Faith formation shouldn't be about checkboxes or obligations, but about meaningful connections. Whatever level of participation works for your family is the right one." Their relief was audible, and our conversation shifted to other topics. Though they ultimately decided not to attend the grandparents' blessing, they sent me a lovely card acknowledging the day, with a recent photo of Sophia and a note expressing appreciation for my role in their daughter's life. This thoughtful gesture spoke volumes about their evolving understanding of my intentions and their growing comfort with the spiritual dimension of our family relationships. The most significant bridge toward reconciliation, however, came from an unexpected direction. In early September, just before Sophia's first birthday, Father David approached me after a parish council meeting. "I've been invited to lead a workshop at the Diocesan Conference on Family Ministry," he explained, focusing on our spiritual Companions program as an innovative approach to intergenerational faith formation. "Would you be willing to co-present with me? Your perspective as both program developer and elder companion would be invaluable." "I'd be honored," I replied, genuinely excited by the opportunity to share our developing model with other parishes. "Excellent," he smiled. "And I've had another thought. Would you consider inviting Elise to join our presentation? Her perspective, as a younger parent navigating these waters, could add an important dimension." I hesitated, uncertain how Elise would react to such an invitation. "She's been increasingly interested in the program," I acknowledged, "but presenting at a church conference might be beyond her comfort zone." "Perhaps," Father David nodded, "but her professional background in crafting persuasive arguments might translate well to this context. And from our conversations, I sense she has thoughtful insights about how traditional faith practices can be meaningfully translated for contemporary families." After careful consideration, I decided to extend the invitation during my next visit with Sophia. To my surprise, Elise responded with immediate interest. "A presentation on intergenerational faith formation?" she repeated, clearly intrigued. "That actually intersects with some thinking I've been doing lately about how values are transmitted across generations, both in families and institutions." Father David thought your perspective as a parent with a different relationship to church. Traditions might be particularly valuable, I explained. Many parishes are struggling to connect with younger families who approach faith more selectively than previous generations did. Elise considered this, then nodded. I'd like to be involved, actually. There's been a lot of miscommunication between generations on these issues, often with both sides assuming the worst about each other's intentions. She gave me a meaningful look that acknowledged our own past tensions. Maybe I could help bridge that gap. The 3 weeks we spent preparing our presentation became an unexpected space for deeper understanding between us. As we discussed how traditional practices could be meaningfully translated for contemporary families, Elise shared insights about her own spiritual journey that she had never previously articulated. I'm not anti-religion, she explained as we refined our talking points one evening at my dining room table. I'm anti-rigidity. What repelled me from institutional faith wasn't the core values but the unwillingness of many religious communities to acknowledge the validity of evolving interpretations. That's a critical distinction, I acknowledged, and one that many traditional believers, including myself at times, have failed to appreciate. The Spiritual Companions program is different, she continued thoughtfully. It offers a framework for connection to tradition without demanding conformity to every historical interpretation. It recognizes that faith development is a journey with many valid paths, not a set of checkboxes to complete. Our presentation at the diocesan conference in late September exceeded all expectations. Father David provided the theological and historical foundation. I outlined the program's structure and implementation, and Elise offered a compelling perspective on how such initiatives could address the needs of young families seeking meaningful spiritual formation outside rigid institutional frameworks. Many of my generation haven't rejected faith, she told the audience of parish leaders and diocesan officials. We've rejected inflexible expressions of faith that don't acknowledge the complexity of contemporary life. Programs like Spiritual Companions offer us a way to access the wisdom of tradition while honoring our role as primary guides in our children's spiritual journeys. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with numerous parishes requesting our materials to develop similar programs. What touched me most deeply, however, wasn't the professional success, but the personal breakthrough this collaboration represented. Elise and I had found common ground in our shared concern for children's spiritual well-being, despite our different starting points and perspectives. The day after the conference, Michael called. Dad would have been so proud of you both, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Mom, your vision for this program, and Elise, the way you articulated its value for our generation. It's exactly the kind of bridge building he always believed in. This invocation of Thomas's memory was particularly meaningful. My late husband had indeed been a builder of bridges, both literally in his engineering career and figuratively in his approach to family and community relationships. He had always believed that apparent contradictions often contained hidden harmonies waiting to be discovered by those willing to look deeper. Sophia's first birthday celebration in late September became a turning point in our family's journey toward reconciliation. Held in the backyard of Michael and Elise's home, it was a joyful gathering of family and friends, including Connor and Jade, Grace Sullivan, Sophia's spiritual companion, and several other participants in the parish program. As I helped Elise prepare food in the kitchen, she broached the subject that had remained largely unaddressed since the christening. I've been thinking a lot about our decision to exclude you from Sophia's baptism, she said, her focus seemingly on the vegetables she was chopping, but her tone deeply reflective. At the time, it felt like a necessary boundary, a statement about the values we wanted for Sophia's upbringing, but I've come to see it differently. I kept my response measured, giving her space to continue this difficult conversation. How so? I think we confuse disagreement with disrespect, she said. Carefully, We assumed that your traditional views meant you couldn't support Sophia's development in a more progressive faith environment. The Spiritual Companions program has shown me that's a false dichotomy. Different perspectives can coexist and even enrich each other without either side compromising their core beliefs. That's a profound insight, I acknowledged. And one I've been learning myself. True respect doesn't require agreement on every issue, just a commitment to understanding each other's genuine concerns. She nodded, meeting my eyes directly. I want to apologize for how we handled the baptism. While we still would have chosen Connor and Jade as godparents, excluding you from even witnessing the ceremony was unnecessary and hurtful. We were making a statement that didn't need to be made, especially at the cost of causing you pain. This straightforward acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for saying that, Elise. It means a great deal to hear you express it so directly. Working with you on the presentation helped me see things from a different perspective, she continued. You've never tried to impose your views on us or criticize our parenting choices. You've consistently supported our authority while finding creative ways to contribute to Sophia's spiritual development. The comparison between that approach and our excluding you from the baptism has been illuminating. Our conversation was interrupted by Michael entering the kitchen, carrying Sophia, who had just awakened from her nap. From his expression, I suspected he had heard at least part of our exchange. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want to echo what Elise is saying. We handled the christening badly. In trying to make a statement about our values, we disrespected yours, particularly after a lifetime of you respecting ours even when you disagreed. I'm sorry." Holding his daughter in one arm, he reached out to embrace me with the other. Dad always said that family relationships aren't about being right, but about being connected. I should have remembered that wisdom. This moment of reconciliation wasn't dramatic or overwrought, just a quiet acknowledgement of hurt caused and lessons learned. As we moved together to the backyard where guests were beginning to arrive, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path that had brought us to this point. A path that had begun with painful exclusion, but led to deeper understanding than might otherwise have been possible. The birthday celebration itself was joyful and relaxed. Sophia, now walking with assistance and babbling expressively, charmed everyone with her delighted response to gifts, cake, and attention. I watched with particular happiness as she interacted comfortably with Grace, who had established a warm relationship through regular visits, incorporating simple faith activities appropriate for an infant. Soft picture books with religious themes, gentle songs about God's love, the forming of bedtime prayer rituals. Late in the afternoon, as the party was winding down, Connor approached me with unexpected warmth. "Virginia, I've been meaning to tell you how much Jade and I appreciate the Spiritual Companions program. As godparents living at a distance, we've worried about maintaining a meaningful connection with Sophia. Knowing that Grace and you are here regularly, sharing the faith dimension we committed to support, it's honestly a relief." "That's exactly what the program is designed to provide," I assured him. "Not replacement, but reinforcement of the baptismal commitments." Michael showed us the historical research about how godparents and elder companions worked together in earlier centuries, he continued. "It makes so much sense, surrounding children with multiple supportive relationships rather than placing all expectations on parents and godparents alone." This conversation illustrated another unexpected benefit of the program. It had actually strengthened rather than diminished the godparents' connection to Sophia by providing a framework for their role that didn't depend solely on regular physical presence. As the final guests departed and I helped with cleanup, Michael asked if I would stay for Sophia's bedtime routine. "She always responds so well to your singing," he explained, "and we've incorporated some of the simple prayer gestures Grace suggested into her bedtime ritual. Watching my son and daughter-in-law move through this evening routine with Sophia, the gentle bath, the familiar stories, the simple blessing with the sign of the cross on her forehead, I witnessed the beautiful integration they had created between their contemporary parenting style and elements of faith tradition that resonated with them. They had found their own authentic approach, incorporating meaningful practices without feeling constrained by every aspect of traditional observance. After Sophia was settled in her crib, the three of us sat in the living room with cups of tea, the conversation flowing easily between family news, parish developments, and plans for the continued expansion of the Spiritual Companions program. The diocese has approved funding to help 3 other parishes implement similar programs, I shared. They're using our materials as a template but adapting them to their specific community needs. That's wonderful, Elise said sincerely. It's becoming something much bigger than we anticipated when we started. Which reminds me, Michael added, we received a call from Bishop Martinez's office yesterday. He's heard about the program and your role in developing it, Mom. He wants to recognize you at the diocesan award ceremony next month for innovative contributions to faith formation. That's very kind, I responded, genuinely touched by this recognition. But the program has been a collaborative effort from the beginning. The bishop specifically mentioned that, Elise smiled. He wants to recognize how the program bridges generational perspectives, with your experience and historical knowledge forming its foundation. The ceremony is during Sunday Mass at the Cathedral. We'd like to be there with you, if that's all right. The significance of this invitation wasn't lost on me. Michael and Elise were offering to attend a formal church service, something they had been hesitant about even for their own daughter's baptism, specifically to support me and acknowledge the program we had built together. I would be honored to have you there, I said simply. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 7 months. What had begun with the painful exclusion from Sophia's christening had evolved into something far more meaningful than mere ceremonial inclusion could have provided. The Spiritual Companions ministry was touching dozens of families beyond our own, creating intergenerational connections that strengthened the entire faith community. My relationship with Michael and Elise had deepened through honest conversation and collaborative work. And Sophia was growing in a rich environment of love and spiritual nurture that drew from both traditional wisdom and contemporary understanding. None of this would have happened had I responded to their hurtful decision with righteous indignation or passive acceptance. It was the creative redirection of that pain into constructive action that had opened unexpected pathways of grace and reconciliation. The following Sunday, as I sat in my usual pew at St. Catherine's, I noticed Michael, Elise, and Sophia slipping quietly into a seat several rows behind me. They hadn't mentioned planning to attend regular Mass, and I was careful not to make too much of their presence, simply smiling and waving at Sophia when she spotted me. After the service, as parishioners gathered for coffee in the community room, Grace approached carrying Sophia, with Michael and Elise following. "Look who's getting better acquainted with her church family," Grace smiled, as Sophia reached out her arms to me. "We thought she might enjoy staying for the children's music program this morning." "That's wonderful," I replied, taking my granddaughter into my arms. The music leader brings instruments for even the little ones to participate. As we moved toward the parish hall where the children's program would be held, Elise touched my arm gently. "We're not making any grand commitments to regular attendance," she said quietly. "But we've been talking about finding ways to incorporate meaningful community traditions into Sophia's life. This seemed like a good place to start. Every journey begins with single steps," I nodded, "and there's no predetermined path you need to follow." Watching Sophia's delighted response to the simple songs about God's love, seated between her parents with her spiritual companion and grandmother nearby, I felt profound gratitude for the way our family's painful conflict had been transformed into a journey of deeper understanding. I had become a godparent to my granddaughter in a way I could never have anticipated, not through the traditional ceremonial role I had initially mourned losing, but through a revived ancient tradition that connected me not just to Sophia, but to all the baptized children in our community. This expanded understanding of spiritual mentorship had enriched not only my relationship with my granddaughter, but the entire parish's approach to faith formation. Sometimes I reflected as I watched Sophia joyfully shaking a small tambourine. To this little light of mine, our greatest blessings emerge from our deepest disappointments, not because the hurt wasn't real, but because it opens doorways to possibilities we might otherwise never have discovered. In being denied one traditional role, I had been led to revive a more profound tradition that would touch countless families beyond our own. That, I realized, was the true meaning of becoming a godparent, another way. Not finding an alternative, title or ceremonial function, but discovering a deeper understanding of spiritual mentorship that transcended conventional definitions and created new pathways for Grace to 5 years have passed since that painful phone call when Michael told me I wouldn't be welcome at my granddaughter's christening. Looking back now, at 78, I can see how that moment of exclusion became the catalyst for something far more meaningful than I could have imagined at the time. What began as a personal hurt transformed into a ministry that has touched hundreds of lives and renewed an ancient tradition that might otherwise have remained forgotten. Sophia is now a bright, inquisitive kindergartner, with her father's analytical mind and her mother's determined spirit. Her relationship with faith has developed in ways that beautifully reflect the collaborative approach her parents and I eventually found, neither rigidly traditional nor entirely secular, but thoughtfully integrative of multiple perspectives. The spiritual companions ministry that emerged from our family conflict has flourished beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a program in a single parish has expanded to over 30 churches across the diocese, with inquiries coming from faith communities nationwide. The model we developed has been featured in religious education journals and discussed at national conferences on faith formation. Looking around the parish hall of St. Catherine's this morning, where we're celebrating the 5th anniversary of the ministry's founding, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that brought us here. The room is filled with children and their spiritual companions, engaged in activities that bridge generations through shared faith, exploration. Michael, Elise, and Sophia are helping at the craft table, where participants are creating visual timelines of their faith journeys, a project that perfectly symbolizes how our understanding of spiritual development has evolved through this program. My role as elder companion has become one of the most meaningful dimensions of my later years, providing purpose and connection far beyond what I anticipated when we established the position. I've formed relationships with dozens of children and their families, offering guidance that honors their parents' primary role, while providing consistent spiritual support through every stage of development. What touches me most deeply, however, is how the ministry has transformed relationships within my own family. The careful bridges Michael, Elise, and I built in those early months have grown into sturdy pathways of mutual respect and collaboration. We still hold different perspectives on certain theological and social issues, but we've learned to navigate those differences with grace rather than tension. The journey to this point wasn't always smooth or straightforward. There were moments of misunderstanding, occasions when old wounds threatened to reopen, times when finding common ground seemed impossible. But with patience, honest communication, and a shared commitment to Sophia's well-being, we gradually created a family dynamic that incorporates multiple perspectives rather than demanding conformity to any single viewpoint. 3 significant developments over these 5 years stand out as particularly meaningful in our family's evolution. The first occurred when Sophia was nearly 2, during a family dinner at my home. She had become fascinated by a small statue of St. Francis that stood in my garden, a simple concrete figure with birds perched on his shoulders and a rabbit at his feet. "Who's that, Grandma?" she asked, pointing to the statue as we walked through the garden before dinner. "That's St. Francis," I explained. He loved animals and believed God wanted us to take care of all creation. Sophia considered this thoughtfully, then declared with toddler certainty, "I love animals too. I'm like St. Francis." At dinner, she proudly announced her connection to St. Francis, which led to a natural conversation about saints as people who demonstrated particular virtues we might aspire to emulate. Michael and Elise participated easily in this discussion, with Elise mentioning that she had always appreciated St. Francis's environmental ethics. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, Michael pulled me aside. "Mom, we'd like your guidance on something. Sophia's clearly connecting with certain religious symbols and stories, but we want to introduce these elements thoughtfully, without some of the more problematic aspects we encountered in our own religious education." "What, specifically, concerns you?" I asked. "The fear element," Elise joined in. "The way sin and divine judgment were emphasized over love and acceptance in much of traditional religious education." This honest question opened the door to one of our most productive conversations about faith formation. Together, we explored approaches that emphasize the loving, inclusive aspects of Christian tradition, while acknowledging that more challenging concepts could be introduced gradually as Sophia's understanding matured. Faith development, like all development, follows natural stages, I explained, drawing on both my educational background and the research we'd incorporated into the Spiritual Companions program. Young children connect most naturally with concrete images and stories that emphasize God's love and care. The more complex theological concepts make sense only as abstract reasoning develops later. This conversation led to a collaborative approach to Sophia's spiritual education, one that drew on traditional resources but implemented them in ways that addressed Michael and Elise's legitimate concerns. I suggested children's books and simple prayers that emphasized God's unconditional love. Grace, as Sophia's spiritual companion, incorporated nature-based spirituality that resonated with the environmental values central to their family life. And Connor and Jade, during their visits as godparents, shared simple faith practices from their own progressive Christian community. Rather than competing influences, these multiple perspectives provided Sophia with a rich tapestry of spiritual resources, always mediated through her parents' thoughtful guidance. Michael and Elise became increasingly comfortable incorporating elements of faith tradition precisely because they never felt pressured to accept an all-or-nothing approach. The second significant development came when Sophia was 4, after she experienced the death of Elise's beloved grandmother. This first encounter with mortality naturally raised questions that intersected with spiritual matters. "Where did great-grandma go?" she asked her parents. "Can she see me? Will I see her again?" Michael called me that evening, seeking perspective on how to address these questions in ways that honored their own uncertain beliefs about afterlife, while providing Sophia with comforting frameworks appropriate to her age. "I don't want to tell her things I don't personally believe," he explained, "but I also don't want to leave her with nothing but confusion and loss." This vulnerable request for guidance touched me deeply. Rather than prescribing specific answers, I suggested approaches that acknowledged mystery while offering hopeful possibilities. "Children need both honesty and hope when facing death," I explained. "It's perfectly appropriate to say, 'I don't know exactly what happens, but many people believe,' and then offer some of the comforting traditions that have helped people through grief for generations." From this conversation emerged a beautiful family ritual. Together, Michael, Elise, Sophia, and I created a remembering garden in a corner of their backyard. A simple arrangement of flowers, a bird feeder, and a small bench where Sophia could sit when she wanted to feel connected to her great-grandmother. We incorporated elements from various spiritual traditions: a smooth stone to leave messages on, a practice from Jewish remembrance traditions, wildflower seeds to symbolize continuing life, drawing on nature-based spirituality, and a small, solar light representing love that continues even when someone is no longer physically present, echoing Christian imagery of eternal light. This collaborative approach to addressing profound questions exemplified how our family had learned to draw on multiple spiritual resources without requiring doctrinal conformity. We had created a space where tradition could offer comfort and meaning without imposing rigid interpretations that might feel inauthentic to any family member. The third significant development occurred just last year, when Michael and Elise surprised me by asking if I would help prepare Sophia for her first communion. Though they had maintained selective participation in parish life over the years, attending major celebrations, family-oriented events, and occasionally Sunday services, they had never indicated interest in Sophia receiving the sacraments beyond baptism. "We've been talking about this for months," Elise explained when they broached the subject during Sunday dinner at my home. "We've observed how meaningfully Sophia connects with certain aspects of faith tradition, particularly the communal elements and the tangible symbols. The Spiritual Companions program has shown us that faith formation doesn't have to be an all-or-nothing proposition," Michael added. "We can engage with meaningful traditions while maintaining our own theological perspective." Sophia herself has been asking questions about communion after seeing other children receive it, Elise continued. "We could simply tell her she needs to wait until she's older to decide for herself. But that doesn't feel right either. She's expressing genuine spiritual curiosity that deserves thoughtful response." Their request reflected the remarkable journey we had traveled together, from their excluding me from Sophia's baptism because my traditional views might send mixed signals, to actively seeking my guidance in preparing their daughter for a central sacrament of the faith. "I would be honored," I told them, "but I'd want to approach this collaboratively, incorporating your perspectives alongside the traditional preparation." What followed was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. Working together with Michael, Elise, Grace, and Father David to create a First Communion preparation process that honored both traditional understanding and contemporary interpretation. We developed family-centered activities that explored the symbolism and community aspects of Eucharist, contextualized the traditional teachings in ways that resonated with their family values, and created space for Sophia's own questions and insights. The preparation culminated in a First Communion celebration that beautifully reflected our family's journey. Sophia received the sacrament during a regular Sunday Mass, surrounded by not only her parents and me, but also her godparents, who traveled from Seattle for the occasion, her spiritual companion Grace, and several friends from the Spiritual Companions program. The celebration afterward at my home included traditional elements alongside contemporary expressions of faith, much like the integrated approach to spirituality that had emerged in our family over the years. What moved me most during that celebration was a quiet conversation with Elise as we prepared food in the kitchen. "I never expected we would be doing this," she admitted, arranging fruit on a platter. "When we excluded you from Sophia's baptism, I was so certain about the boundaries we needed to establish. I saw faith primarily as a set of doctrinal positions, rather than a living tradition that could be engaged with critically and selectively. The Spiritual Companions program changed my perspective," she continued thoughtfully. "Watching how you and Grace have respected our parental authority while offering Sophia meaningful connections to tradition, it's shown me that spiritual formation doesn't have to be either rigid adherence or complete rejection. There's a middle path that honors both heritage and contemporary understanding." This evolution in thinking wasn't limited to Elise and Michael. My own understanding of faith transmission had grown significantly through our journey together. I had come to recognize that my traditional approach sometimes emphasized conformity over authentic connection, doctrinal precision over lived experience. Through collaborating with younger parents and observing their thoughtful navigation of contemporary challenges, I had developed a more nuanced appreciation for how eternal truths must find new expression in each generation. The Spiritual Companions ministry itself evolved significantly during these 5 years, incorporating insights gained from implementation across diverse communities. What began as a program primarily focused on supporting baptized children's faith development expanded to include components addressing contemporary family configurations, interfaith households, and the needs of children experiencing various forms of trauma or transition. Father David, who had been such a crucial supporter in the program's early development, often commented on how the ministry exemplified healthy tradition, not static preservation of past forms, but creative continuity that maintained essential meaning while adapting to contemporary contexts. The most vibrant traditions have always evolved, he noted during a recent planning meeting. What makes this program so effective is that it honors the wisdom of the past while responding to the actual needs of today's families. That's not compromise, it's authentic development. The diocesan recognition of our work, which initially focused on my role as founder, expanded to acknowledge the collaborative nature of the ministry and its intergenerational leadership model. Last year, the bishop appointed a formal ministry team that included me as elder companion, 2 middle-aged parent representatives, and a young adult who had participated in similar mentoring programs during her own childhood. This leadership structure embodied the very intergenerational collaboration the program sought to foster. As I look around the parish hall this morning, watching the 5th anniversary celebration unfold, particular interactions catch my attention and warm my heart. Connor and Jade, Sophia's godparents, are engaged in animated conversation with Grace, her spiritual companion, comparing perspectives on a children's Bible they're considering as a gift for their own daughter. Michael is helping a group of children create faith journey timelines, drawing on both his engineering precision and the spiritual literacy he has developed through our family's experience. Elise is conferring with Sister Margaret about a proposal to expand the program's resources for families navigating difficult conversations about social issues with children. And Sophia, my bright, thoughtful, spiritually attuned granddaughter, moves confidently through this multi-generational gathering, equally comfortable with elderly parish members and young families. She stops beside me, slipping her small hand into mine. "Grandma, you know what I just realized?" she says, her expression serious. "If you had been at my baptism, you might never have become the elder companion, and then none of this would have happened." She gestures to the room full of children and adults engaged in shared activities, from the mouths of babes, as the saying goes. Her innocent observation captures the profound truth at the heart of our family's journey, that sometimes our deepest disappointments open doorways to possibilities we could never have imagined. "That's very insightful, sweetheart," I tell her, squeezing her hand gently. "Sometimes when one door closes, God opens another that leads to even better places." She nods with the solemn wisdom of a child who has been raised with multiple perspectives on faith. Like when the apostles were sad because Jesus died, but then Easter happened and they got to share his story with everybody. This simple theological connection, drawing parallels between our family's experience and the central Christian narrative of resurrection, exemplifies the integrated faith understanding Sophia is developing. Neither rigidly doctrinal nor dismissively secular, her spiritual framework incorporates meaningful tradition alongside critical thinking and personal experience. Later that afternoon, as the celebration winds down, Father David asks me to offer a closing reflection. Standing before this community that has formed around a ministry born from personal pain, I find myself filled with profound gratitude for the unexpected journey of these 5 years. "When we established the Spiritual Companions Ministry," I begin, "we were drawing on ancient tradition to address contemporary needs. What we couldn't have anticipated was how this intergenerational approach would transform our understanding of faith transmission itself." I share briefly how the program emerged from my exclusion from Sophia's christening, a story most in the room already know, but emphasize how that initial hurt was transformed into creative possibility through collaboration rather than conflict. "The greatest lesson I've learned through this journey," I continue, is that faith tradition isn't a fixed museum piece to be preserved unchanged, nor is it an outdated relic to be discarded. It's a living heritage that requires both reverent preservation and courageous adaptation. Looking at Michael, Elise, and Sophia seated among the gathered families, I add, true legacy isn't about perfect replication of past forms, but about transmitting essential meaning in ways that speak authentically to each new generation. Sometimes, that requires us to step back from our attachment to particular expressions of faith to recognize the deeper purpose they were meant to serve. As I conclude my remarks, I invite everyone to participate in a simple blessing ritual, linking hands across generations to symbolize the connected nature of faith transmission. The room forms a living chain, from infants in parents' arms to elders in their 80s, each person receiving and extending blessing to those beside them. This physical expression of intergenerational connection perfectly embodies what we've created together. Not a hierarchy where wisdom flows only from old to young, but a living circle where each age group contributes essential perspectives to our shared spiritual journey. After the formal conclusion of the celebration, as families gather belongings and say goodbyes, Michael approaches me with an unexpected question. Mom, we've been thinking about something for months, but weren't sure how to bring it up. He begins, somewhat hesitantly. Sophia has been asking about confirmation recently, after hearing older children in the parish discuss their preparation. That's usually not until adolescence, I remind him gently. We know, he nods. But her questions have prompted us to think about our own faith journeys more intentionally. Elise and I have been discussing whether we might participate in the adult confirmation preparation process Father David offers. This revelation catches me completely by surprise. While Michael and Elise had grown increasingly comfortable participating in aspects of parish life, they had never expressed interest in formally recommitting to the faith tradition themselves. This isn't about doctrinal conformity, Michael clarifies, perhaps seeing my startled expression. It's about thoughtfully engaging with our spiritual heritage in a more intentional way. The Spiritual Companions program has shown us that faith community can accommodate diverse perspectives while maintaining meaningful connection to tradition. The preparation process includes study, service, and reflection components, Elise adds, joining our conversation. Father David assures us it's designed for contemporary adults with questions and uncertainties, not just those seeking pat answers. We thought you might... Well, would you consider serving as our sponsor if we decide to proceed? This request, that I would stand as spiritual mentor to my adult son and daughter-in-law as they reconsider their relationship with faith tradition, represents the most profound reconciliation I could have imagined. From excluding me from their daughter's baptism because my traditional views might contaminate her spiritual formation, they have come to value my guidance in their own faith journeys. I would be honored, I tell them, emotion making further words difficult. As we walk together toward the parking lot, Sophia skipping ahead with boundless energy, Michael expresses what this journey has meant from his perspective. You know, Mom, when we decided to exclude you from the christening, we thought we were making a clear statement about boundaries and values. What we didn't understand was that true values aren't protected by building walls, but by creating bridges. The Spiritual Companions program has demonstrated that, Elise adds thoughtfully, it respects boundaries while creating connections, honors differences while recognizing shared purpose. That's the model we want for our family's spiritual life going forward. Watching them drive away, with Sophia waving enthusiastically from her car seat, I reflect on the extraordinary journey that began with that painful phone call 5 years ago. The exclusion that initially seemed like rejection had opened pathways to deeper understanding and more authentic connection than might otherwise have been possible. My role as Sophia's godparent another way had evolved far beyond any traditional conceptualization of spiritual mentorship. Through the revival of the elder companion tradition, I had found a meaningful framework for nurturing not just my granddaughter's faith development, but that of dozens of children throughout our parish community. More importantly, this alternative path had created space for genuine reconciliation within our family, not through compromising deeply held beliefs on either side, but through developing mutual respect for different perspectives and finding common ground in shared values. Michael and Elise had moved from defensive boundary setting to thoughtful engagement with tradition. I had progressed from rigid expectations to creative adaptation of meaningful practices. As I return home to my quiet house, I find myself drawn to the small home altar I've maintained since Thomas's passing. Among the meaningful objects gathered, there, a cross he carved during his retirement years, candles from significant family celebrations, a small icon of the Holy Family, stands a recent addition, a family photograph taken at Sophia's first communion celebration last year. In the image, 4 generations are represented, from Elise's father to little Sophia, with Michael, Elise, and me in between. We stand together before St. Catherine's altar, united not by identical beliefs, but by mutual respect and shared commitment to nurturing Sophia's spiritual growth in ways that honor multiple perspectives. This photograph embodies the legacy that emerged from my painful exclusion 5 years ago, not just the spiritual companions ministry that now serves hundreds of families, but the transformed understanding within our own family of how faith tradition can be transmitted across generations in ways that respect both continuity and change. Sometimes I reflect as I light a small candle before this family image. Our deepest disappointments truly do open doorways to grace we could never have imagined. Being prevented from serving as the godparent I had expected to be led me to become a different kind of godparent altogether, one whose influence extended beyond a single ceremony to touch countless lives through revived tradition and renewed understanding. That, I now understand, is the true meaning of legacy. Not rigid preservation of forms and formulas, but creative transmission of essential meaning in ways that speak authentically to each new generation. In losing the role I had expected, I discovered a calling that reached far beyond my expectations, transforming not just my relationship with my granddaughter, but an entire community's approach to faith formation. As the evening light fades outside my window, I offer a simple prayer of gratitude for the journey, with all its painful beginnings and unexpected graces that brought us here. The path hasn't always been easy or straightforward, but it has led to a place of deeper understanding and more authentic connection than I could have imagined when it began. And isn't that, after all, what the spiritual journey is ultimately about? Not perfect adherence to predetermined patterns, but faithful responsiveness to the grace that emerges in unexpected places, transforming our deepest disappointments into doorways to previously unimagined possibilities. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.